Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. It was late at night on August 30th, 2003 in Las Cruces, New Mexico. A 22-year-old college student named Katie Sepik had just left a party. She was upset, walking home alone, and didn't have her keys. By the next morning, she had disappeared. Her phone and purse were found, even her shoes, but Katie was nowhere to be seen. At first, no one could imagine what had happened, but the truth that would come out in the weeks and months that followed shocked everyone, her family, her friends, and the entire community. This is Katie's story. Katie Sepik came into the world on December 26, 1980, in the quiet town of Carlsbad, New Mexico. She was the firstborn of Dave and Jean Sepik, growing up alongside her younger siblings, AJ and Carolyn. From early on, Katie stood out, not just as the eldest, but as someone with a strong presence. She had a natural ability to take charge, yet never lost sight of being warm and protective toward the people she loved. To her brother AJ, Katie was more than a sister. She was a confidant and a guardian. Beneath her commanding nature was a vibrant sense of humor. Friends often described her as the kind of person who could make you laugh until your stomach hurt, even if the joke was on her. She was quick-witted and self-deprecating, able to turn any awkward moment into something charming and funny. People were drawn to Katie. Her confidence, her charm, and her genuine spirit made her well-loved wherever she went. Katie was studying business administration at New Mexico State University, and it was a field that suited her perfectly. Smart, calm under pressure, and driven, she had all the qualities of a future leader. She lived in an apartment on the east side of Las Cruces, conveniently close to campus. To help with expenses, she also worked part-time at a buzzing Mexican restaurant that was popular with locals and students alike. Though she was steadily working toward her degree, Katie wasn't entirely sure what came next. Her mother, Jayan, once said Katie dreamed big. She wanted to leave her mark on the world, to make a real difference. She didn't have a clear path yet, but she knew she was meant for something extraordinary. At the time, Katie was in a relationship with Joe Bischoff, a fellow student studying biochemistry. The two were inseparable, deeply in love, and full of plans for the future. Joe even gave her a diamond ring, a promise for the life they envisioned together after graduation. After earning her bachelor's degree, Katie was planning to continue with a master's program, while Joe returned to his hometown of Gallup for a new job. They weren't broken up, just taking different steps forward in their lives, still committed, still making time for each other whenever possible. But the future Katie had envisioned never came. On the night of August 30th, 2003, during Labor Day weekend, Katie, Joe, and her roommate Tracy attended a college party in a neighborhood not far from Katie's apartment. The plan was simple: enjoy the night and crash at the house afterward. But by morning, things had taken a terrifying turn. Tracy woke up to find Katie gone. Her purse, keys, and phone were all still at the house. Joe was there, but Katie had vanished. The two friends began calling everyone they could think of. When no one had seen her, they contacted Katie's parents, who were just as confused and concerned. By August 31st, Katie was officially reported missing. That same day, a horrifying discovery was made. Local residents passing near an old landfill site in Las Cruces stumbled upon something in the dirt, what appeared to be a woman's body. Police were called immediately. The scene was gruesome. The woman had clearly endured a violent assault. Her clothes had been removed, and she bore injuries that suggested she fought hard to defend herself. There were burns on the body, hinting that the attacker may have tried to set her on fire. Detectives also found fresh tire tracks nearby, suggesting that the body had been transported and left there after the crime took place elsewhere. Although her identity hadn't yet been confirmed, the recent missing persons report gave detectives a strong suspicion. Katie's father, Dave, was brought in to identify the body, and to his heartbreak, it was Katie. Investigators turned their attention to the people closest to her, starting with Joe and Tracy. Joe explained that they'd been at the party together, but at some point, Katie disappeared. He assumed she had simply gone home early. Only the next morning, when she didn't show up or respond, did he realize something was wrong. Meanwhile, another team of officers checked out Katie's apartment. What they found raised even more questions. Just below her bedroom window, a pair of women's shoes lay haphazardly discarded. They were Katie's. Looking up, detectives saw that the window screen had been removed and tossed aside. Nothing appeared to be broken, but it was clear someone had tried to get in or out. This led them to a possible scenario. Katie may have returned home from the party, realized she didn't have her keys, and decided to climb through her bedroom window to get inside. But whatever happened after that remains unclear. At first, it seemed like Katie Sapich had simply gone home from the party, exhausted and not wanting to walk back later to grab her things. That's what her friends assumed, anyway. But while they believed she was safe at home, investigators were piecing together a much darker possibility, one where Katie was attacked after returning to her apartment. But by whom? Was it a random predator, or did someone close to her have something to do with it? And most puzzling of all, why did Katie suddenly leave the party? Detectives circled back to question her friends once more, hoping to close some of the gaps in their timeline. That's when they discovered the reason Katie left. She had caught Joe, her boyfriend, kissing another girl at the party. Katie had stormed off, hurt and furious. This discovery put a new spotlight on Joe, not just because of the betrayal, but because he hadn't mentioned any of it during his initial interviews. When he was first questioned, Joe claimed to have no idea why Katie left. Now it seemed he had been keeping a crucial part of the story to himself. Understandably, this raised serious red flags. Joe later admitted that Katie was upset with him and left the party because of what she saw. He added that he drove past her house afterward to check on her, and even tried calling her the next morning. But this only deepened the investigators' suspicions, because Joe knew Katie had left her phone behind at the party. Why would he call a phone he knew she couldn't answer? To the detectives, it seemed like Joe might be trying to craft a narrative, and they began considering the possibility that he was involved in Katie's death. But they needed proof, and that meant DNA. Katie's attacker had left behind biological evidence, including skin under her fingernails, and DNA was also found on her body. This was the early 2000s, so DNA testing was possible, though not as advanced as today. Still, it was enough to rule suspects in or out. But when investigators asked Joe to submit a DNA sample, he flat out refused. That refusal sent shockwaves through the investigation. Katie's loved ones were devastated. Joe had been a part of their lives, someone they believed their daughter loved deeply. Now he was being uncooperative during the most crucial time. To Katie's family, it felt like betrayal on top of tragedy. Police were stuck. Their strongest lead was now stonewalling them. Without a DNA sample, they had no way to directly link or eliminate Joe as the suspect. In the meantime, they interviewed and tested every man who'd been close to Katie. But time after time, the DNA came back with no match. Joe remained under quiet surveillance, but he didn't do anything that screamed guilt. It left detectives frustrated and confused. Months passed. Then came a break. Investigators learned that Katie and Joe had been intimate on the night of the party. This led them to collect and test the bedding in Katie's apartment. Male DNA was found, presumably Joe's, but when it was compared to the DNA from the crime scene, there was no match. That was a huge moment. If the DNA on the bed belonged to Joe, then the DNA on Katie's body came from someone else. But to be certain, and to officially clear him, they needed Joe's DNA to compare directly. This time, Joe agreed. He finally submitted a sample, and when the results came back, it was confirmed. He wasn't the killer. Joe later explained his hesitation. He feared that since he and Katie had been physically close that night, his DNA might be misinterpreted and used against him. While his fear might have been valid, his silence cost the investigation valuable time. 3 whole months, in fact, during which Katie's case stalled. With Joe ruled out, detectives had to start over. Now, the working theory was that Katie's killer was a stranger. Using the DNA collected at the scene, investigators were able to extract a partial ethnic profile. It suggested the suspect was a Hispanic male, and the tire tracks near Katie's body? They were believed to come from a pickup truck. A Hispanic man, possibly driving a pickup. That was all they had to go on. Leads came and went. Every known offender in the region was investigated. Katie's parents even offered a $100,000 reward for information that could help solve the case. But nothing came up. Nothing stuck. The momentum of the investigation began to fade, and the weight of silence grew heavier for Katie's family. Katie's mother refused to let her daughter become another cold case. She fought hard to keep Katie's story alive, speaking out and pushing for answers. Still, days turned into weeks, then into years. Then, in December of 2006, a breakthrough came. A DNA match had finally been found. The DNA belonged to a 27-year-old man named Gabriel Avila. At the time of the match, Avila was already serving time in prison for aggravated burglary and assault. That conviction, committed just 3 months after Katie's murder, is what led to his DNA being uploaded to the system. In that case, Gabriel had broken into a home while armed with a knife, planning to rob and potentially harm the woman living there. What he didn't expect was that the woman had a roommate. Spooked by the unexpected presence, Avila fled the scene. He was arrested shortly after, but was released on bond and then vanished. For over a year, Gabriel remained in hiding. Eventually, authorities tracked him down, and he was convicted for the 2003 burglary attempt. He was sentenced to 9 years behind bars. Now, thanks to that conviction, police had a name tied to the DNA that had haunted them for years. Investigators immediately began building a case, digging into Gabriel Avila's background. They found out he had once been married, and they decided to speak with his ex-wife to learn more. That interview brought a chilling revelation. Back in 2003, Gabriel owned a pickup truck, the same type of vehicle suspected of being used to dump Katie's body. But what truly blew the case wide open was what Gabriel's ex-wife discovered in the truck's cup holder years earlier. A diamond ring. It wasn't just any ring. It was the same one Joe had given to Katie, a piece of jewelry she wore every single day. Her parents had even mentioned its absence when her body was found. For some reason, Gabriel had kept the ring. His ex-wife, believing he was cheating, had hung onto it as proof. What she didn't realize was that this ring would become the key piece of evidence linking Gabriel directly to Katie's murder. 3 years later, she still had the ring. She handed it over to detectives, who now had a physical item stolen from Katie, one that had stayed in the killer's possession all this time. With this new evidence, police headed to the prison to confront Gabriel. At first, he denied everything. He claimed not to know Katie. But the moment they placed the ring in front of him, his entire demeanor shifted. The facade crumbled. Gabriel Avila confessed. He told investigators he had never met Katie before that night. He had been driving around Las Cruces in his pickup truck when he nearly hit a young woman walking along the road. Katie. He offered her a ride home, but she declined and kept walking. That should have been the end of it. But instead, something dark inside Gabriel took over. He followed her. Katie had forgotten her keys and was trying to get back into her apartment by climbing through her bedroom window. That's when Gabriel attacked. He crept up behind her and dragged her to the ground. Katie fought back with everything she had, even scratching him in the struggle. But he was stronger. He overpowered her, sexually assaulted her, and then took her life. When asked why he didn't walk away after the assault, Gabriel said he was afraid Katie would report him. Afterward, he loaded Katie's body into his truck and drove to the landfill, where he tried to destroy all evidence by setting the scene on fire. But the fire didn't burn long enough or hot enough. Whether it was the wind or insufficient fuel, the flames died out and left behind the very evidence that would one day catch him. In December 2006, Gabriel Avila was officially charged with the assault and murder of Katie Sepich. He pled guilty. The court sentenced him to 69 years in prison, on top of the 9 years he was already serving. For Katie's loved ones, the news brought a mixture of relief and heartache. The person responsible was finally behind bars, but it had taken 3 agonizing years. And during that time, he had attempted another violent crime. Her family wasn't content to let that be the end of it. They turned their grief into action. Katie's parents began pushing for change. They advocated for legislation that would ensure that DNA is collected at the time of arrest for violent crimes, not after conviction. Their efforts led to the creation of the Katie Sepich Enhanced DNA Collection Act of 2010, better known as Katie's Law. This legislation aimed to empower law enforcement by using DNA technology earlier in the process. It allowed DNA to be collected from individuals arrested for serious crimes like murder, assault, abduction, and stalking. The goal was clear: catch dangerous individuals before they could harm anyone else. In a way, Katie did change the world, just not in the way anyone could have imagined. Her story inspired a national movement and helped bring about a powerful legal tool that continues to bring justice to families across the country. Katie's absence is felt deeply by those who loved her. Her smile, her spark, and her dreams live on in their hearts. And while no sentence could ever erase their pain, the Sepich family finds comfort in knowing that their daughter's legacy is protecting others and that she will never be forgotten. Katie had her entire life ahead of her, one filled with potential, ambition, and love. But in a single moment, a complete stranger took that all away. What remains is a story that is both heartbreaking and inspiring. A story of unimaginable loss, relentless pursuit of justice, and a family that refused to let their daughter's light be extinguished. Case 2. It was a normal Saturday morning in Bethesda, Maryland, when the manager of a Lululemon store showed up to open for the day. But the moment she walked inside, she knew something was wrong. The store was a mess, clothes everywhere, mannequins knocked over, and the floor had blood on it. As she stood there in shock, she heard something, a soft moan coming from the back. What she found next would leave everyone speechless. 2 employees had been inside the store the night before. Now one of them was dead, and the other was tied up and hurt. At first, it seemed like a terrible robbery gone wrong. But as police started asking questions, the story began to change. And what really happened that night was far worse than anyone imagined. Jana Murray entered the world on November 22, 1980, in Wichita, Kansas. She was the daughter of David and Phyllis Rosalind Murray. From a young age, Jana stood out for her adventurous spirit. She had a deep love for animals and dancing, and giving back was part of who she was. She spent much of her life volunteering. Her friends and family often described her as someone whose smile could light up any room. Jana also had an undeniable passion for travel. Her goal was to set foot on every continent, and she managed to visit all of them except Antarctica. For her 30th birthday, she marked the occasion by filming herself bungee jumping, perfectly capturing her thrill-seeking nature. Academically, Jana was a star. Her hard work earned her a scholarship that took her to Madrid, where she spent 2 years studying at St. Louis University. She later completed her Bachelor of Science degree at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. But Jana didn't stop there. She pushed forward and eventually earned dual master's degrees in communication and business administration from Johns Hopkins University. For her master's thesis, she focused on Lululemon Athletica, a premium yoga and fitness apparel brand. Naturally, she pursued a position with the company after graduating, and her drive and business instincts quickly landed her a role. By 2011, Jana was a team leader at the Lululemon store in Bethesda, Maryland. She was also close to finishing her second master's degree. Outside of work and school, Jana was in a happy relationship with her longtime boyfriend, Fraser Bozel. What she didn't know was that Fraser had begun researching engagement rings. He was preparing to propose. Life was falling into place beautifully for Jana. Her career was thriving, her education nearly complete, and her relationship was stronger than ever. A bright future was just around the corner. But everything changed on March 11, 2011. Jana's promising journey was suddenly cut short by a tragic and unimaginable event. The next morning, on March 12th, Rachel, the manager of the Lululemon store, arrived at the Bethesda location shortly before 8 a.m. to open up. Bethesda was generally considered a quiet, safe area, but when Rachel reached the entrance, she noticed the door wasn't locked. That was her first sign something was off. As she stepped inside, it was immediately clear that something terrible had happened. The store was in disarray. Mannequins were knocked over, clothes were scattered, and more horrifyingly, blood was splattered across the floors, walls, and ceiling. Still trying to make sense of the chaos, Rachel suddenly heard faint moaning. Someone was still inside and in pain. Overwhelmed with panic and fear, she ran out of the store and straight to the neighboring Apple store, where a long line of customers had gathered for the release of the new iPad 2. Among the crowd, one man named Ryan couldn't help but notice how distressed Rachel appeared as she stood outside the Lululemon store. When she explained something was terribly wrong inside, Ryan offered to go in with her and check it out. Inside, Ryan walked toward the back of the store, moving past the chaos. Bloody footprints marked the floor, and the space looked like a disaster zone. As he neared the office area, he stumbled upon something unimaginable. A woman with long blonde hair was lying face down in a pool of blood. Before he could fully process the horror, a soft moan caught his attention. It was coming from the bathroom. Inside, he found another woman, her hands and ankles bound with zip ties, her body bloodied but still alive. It was clear she was injured and in pain, but miraculously she was breathing. Ryan rushed back to the front of the store and told Rachel to call 911 immediately. First responders arrived quickly and were faced with a gruesome scene. They began the task of identifying the 2 women. Tragically, the deceased was 30-year-old Jana Murray. The survivor, badly hurt but alive, was identified as Brittany Norwood, a 28-year-old employee who had transferred from a Lululemon store in Georgetown just 6 weeks earlier. Brittany's injuries were extensive. Cuts and bruises covered her legs, arms, chest, face, and torso. Zip ties still restrained her, and both women's pants had been slashed, raising disturbing concerns that the attackers may have assaulted them. Brittany was rushed to the local hospital, visibly shaken and in need of immediate care. Back at the store, investigators began examining the body of Jana Murray. The violence inflicted on her defied belief. Medical examiners would later find 331 wounds on her body, over half of which were concentrated on her chest and face. She had been attacked with at least 6 different tools found scattered throughout the store, most of them likely taken from a store toolbox, items including a hammer, a box cutter, a wrench, and a knife. Around her neck was a ligature, though it wasn't tight enough to suggest strangulation. Still, it was an odd and unsettling detail. Jana's body was transported for an autopsy, while her devastated parents and boyfriend were notified of her death. The autopsy revealed heartbreaking truths. Jana had fought with everything she had. Her body bore over 100 defensive wounds. Ultimately, the fatal blow had struck the back of her neck. There was evidence that she had tried to escape. The blood trail led toward the store's emergency exit. There was even blood on the door handle, along with a key still in the lock, Jana's key. The attack had lasted for roughly 20 minutes. The idea that Jana had endured such agony for so long was almost too much to bear. Detectives urgently needed answers, but they were met with challenges. The Lululemon store had no external security cameras, which meant they had no footage showing who might have entered or exited the store that night. That lack of surveillance was seen as a serious oversight. Investigators turned to the Apple Store's security footage across the street and discovered video from the night before that showed 2 men dressed in dark clothing walking near the store around the time the attack occurred. However, the footage was taken from too far away to make any definitive identification. With no other leads, detectives turned to the only person who might know the truth, Brittany Norwood. Though Brittany was still clearly traumatized, flinching and recoiling from any physical touch, she eventually shared her account of what had happened. According to Brittany, on the evening of March 11, 2011, she and Jana were on the closing shift. Jana had driven to work while Brittany took public transit. After locking up the store, they went their separate ways. But shortly after arriving at the metro station, Brittany realized she had left her metro card inside the store. She called another coworker to get Jana's number and then phoned her directly. Despite having nearly reached home, Jana turned back to help Brittany. It was just like her to go out of her way for someone else. At around 10:05 p.m., Jana unlocked the store door with Brittany right behind her. But the moment the door opened, 2 masked men in dark clothing pushed their way inside. One was tall, the other shorter. Both appeared to be white and in their 20s. She said the shorter man attacked her, while the taller one took hold of Jana. They forced the women to the back of the store, threatened them, and told Brittany they knew where she lived. She had utility bills in her purse with her address, along with her ID. Terrified, Brittany believed the men were robbers and hoped they would just take what they wanted and leave. But instead, she claimed the situation spiraled into violence. Both women were physically assaulted and taunted with racial slurs. Brittany said they were violated, and during the chaos, she could hear Jana screaming. Eventually, the screaming stopped. Brittany said that's when she knew Jana was gone. She feared she was next. But then, unexpectedly, the men told her they would spare her life. Why they chose to leave her alive, she didn't know. When Brittany was asked why the attacker spared her, her answer was chilling. They said she was fun to take advantage of. Once the brutal assault ended, the men allegedly tied Brittany up and left her inside one of the store's bathrooms. That's where she was later discovered. The interview was eventually cut short, so investigators could focus on gathering forensic evidence, hoping to find DNA that would lead them to the men responsible. Meanwhile, based on Brittany's account, authorities set up surveillance outside the Lululemon store. Not long after, they spotted 2 men dressed in black, matching Brittany's description, and stopped them for questioning. But this promising lead quickly unraveled. The men were waiters from a nearby restaurant, and they walked that same path every night after their shifts. The black clothing? Part of their work uniform. Digging into surveillance footage from previous nights, police confirmed that these 2 men regularly passed by the store at that same time, following the exact route. Both had rock-solid alibis for the night of the crime, and were cooperative with investigators. They willingly provided their DNA and shoe prints for comparison. Everything was sent for analysis, but it all came back clean. On March 16, 2011, 5 days after the incident, Brittany was brought in again for further questioning. When asked if she knew what kind of car Jana drove, she said she didn't. The interview wrapped up shortly after, but the next day a surprising twist. Brittany's siblings contacted the police and said she had something else to share. They explained that she was afraid to come forward on her own, fearful that the attackers might return and hurt her if she said too much. So, on March 18th, Brittany sat down with detectives for a third interview. This time, she admitted that she actually did know what Jana's car looked like because the attackers had made her move it. According to Brittany, the men forced her to drive Jana's car away from the store before they assaulted her. They told her she was being watched and threatened to kill her if she tried anything or didn't return right away. While moving the car, she noticed a police officer nearby, but didn't approach him, fearing for her life. Yet, despite this explanation, the police began to suspect that Brittany wasn't being fully honest. One major inconsistency involved her earlier claims that both she and Jana had been sexually assaulted. Their pants had been sliced, seemingly supporting that story. But 6 days into the investigation, forensic testing told a different tale. The results were shocking. There was no evidence of sexual assault. In fact, the only DNA present at the scene belonged to Jana and Brittany. No trace of any male DNA anywhere. Even the samples from the two waiters didn't match anything at the scene. Investigators turned their attention to another key detail: footprints. Strangely, all the prints were contained inside the store. If the attackers had entered from outside, there would likely have been some kind of trail leading in or out. But there was nothing. That left police with two possible explanations. Either the attackers swapped shoes inside the store, which made little sense, or the attacker never left, because they had never come in from outside. Even more suspicious, the smaller footprints found throughout the scene matched Brittany's shoes. The larger set belonged to a size 14 shoe. At first, this seemed like a potential clue pointing to an unidentified male assailant. But when they matched the print to store inventory, they found the shoes had come from Loyalman's own stockroom. They were store property. This raised a critical question. If two men had ambushed Jana and Brittany, why would they take the time to change into store-brand shoes during a violent crime? It just didn't add up. Meanwhile, employees at the Apple store next door told police something disturbing. Around 10:30 p.m. on the night of the attack, they had heard a loud argument coming from Lululemon. Several staff members, including a security guard named Ricardo, said they distinctly heard two women fighting, one of them pleading, "Talk to me. Please don't do this. What's going on?" The voices were followed by crashing sounds, what sounded like a struggle, and something heavy being dragged across the floor. But no one heard a man's voice. At one point, someone was heard whispering, "God, please help me." Tragically, no one at the Apple store called the police. They dismissed the commotion as a workplace disagreement, some internal drama. Little did they know that Jana was fighting for her life just a few feet away. With all these discoveries piling up, detectives were growing more and more suspicious of Brittany. As investigators dug deeper into Brittany's background, one particular detail kept popping up, and it was more troubling than they could have imagined. Brittany Norwood had a secret, and it followed her long before she ever stepped foot into the Lululemon store. In college, Brittany had a reputation. Friends, roommates, and even teammates began to notice things disappearing: money, clothes, makeup. When it happened often enough, people started to talk, and eventually her kleptomaniac tendencies caught up with her. Reports were filed, and as a result, Brittany lost her scholarship and was expelled from school. By 2007, Brittany had relocated to Maryland and started working at a hotel. She quickly rose to a managerial role, but history repeated itself. When coworkers discovered that Brittany had been stealing from them, she was fired. Despite her rocky past, Brittany still had ambitions. She dreamed of becoming a personal trainer and eventually opening her own fitness center. Her job at Lululemon wasn't meant to be permanent. It was supposed to be a stepping stone toward a bigger goal. Jana Murray and Brittany weren't particularly close. They worked side by side, were friendly enough, but there wasn't much beyond that. Nothing suggested there was bad blood between them. So what triggered the horrifying events of March 11, 2011? That evening, before the store closed, employees went through the standard procedure, a mandatory bag check designed to prevent internal theft. Jana was tasked with inspecting Brittany's bag, and what she found raised a red flag. A pair of Lululemon leggings with the tag still attached sat inside. Jana didn't confront Brittany directly, but she contacted their manager and reported the incident. The manager told Jana she would handle it in the morning. Somehow Brittany found out. Later that night, after the store had closed and the employees had gone home, Brittany contacted Jana. She claimed she had left her Metro card at the store and needed help retrieving it. Jaina, being the kind and helpful person she was, agreed to return. What happened next is believed to have been a confrontation, Brittany possibly begging Jaina not to report her, hoping to avoid yet another firing. But when Jaina stood firm, refusing to back down, the situation turned volatile. Investigators believe Brittany attacked Jaina with store tools, items like a wrench, a hammer, a box cutter. As Jaina fought desperately to escape, trying to reason with Brittany, the assault escalated to a level of unimaginable brutality. After taking Jaina's life, Brittany moved her car to a different location to buy time and cover her tracks. A witness later reported seeing Brittany in the vehicle, and nearly 90 minutes later, she was still sitting there, possibly formulating the story she would tell next. Brittany returned to the store, put on size 14 shoes found on site, and staged the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. She trashed the space, took cash from the registers, and then inflicted minor injuries on herself before zip-tying her own wrists and ankles. She placed herself in the bathroom and waited until morning, when coworkers discovered the horrifying scene. All of it a chillingly calculated attempt to divert suspicion. Jaina lost her life over a pair of stolen leggings. On March 18, 2011, exactly 1 week after the crime, Brittany Norwood was arrested. Prosecutors faced a challenge. They had to prove that this wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, but a premeditated murder. If they succeeded, Brittany would receive life without parole. Her defense team, however, aimed for a lesser charge, second-degree murder, arguing that she had snapped in the heat of the moment. The trial began in October 2011. The lead prosecutor, John McCarthy, painted Brittany as a manipulative woman and a compulsive liar. He laid out overwhelming forensic evidence and highlighted the inconsistencies in her story to prove that Brittany had planned the attack. Meanwhile, the defense admitted Brittany had killed Jaina, but argued that it was not pre-planned. They said it was a tragic case of a young woman who panicked and lost control, but the details told a different story. Jaina didn't die quickly. She fought hard, left behind a trail of blood, tried to escape, and endured a 20-minute-long attack. She was conscious through most of it. That kind of prolonged violence made it clear this wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. The jury didn't need long to reach a decision. After just an hour of deliberation, they found Brittany Norwood guilty of first-degree murder. In January 2012, Brittany was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called the murder cold-blooded, premeditated, and merciless, and condemned the calculated steps Brittany took after the killing. He also criticized the Apple Store employees for their failure to act when they heard Jaina pleading for help, calling it an example of callous indifference. In 2015, Brittany's final appeal was denied. She remains imprisoned at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. This case will be remembered not only for its cruelty, but also for the heartbreaking irony. Jaina was murdered by someone she tried to help. All she did was tell the truth, and for that, she paid the ultimate price. Case 3. On a summer evening in July 2011, Laura Ackerson got into her car and drove toward Raleigh, North Carolina. She was going to pick up her kids from her ex, Grant Hayes. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just like many others before. But this time, Laura didn't come back. At first, her friends weren't too worried. Maybe she got delayed. Maybe her phone died. But when days went by with no word from her, they knew something was wrong. Behind the scenes, something terrible had already happened. Police would later find an apartment that smelled strongly of bleach. Items were missing. A strange letter appeared, and Grant and his new wife were suddenly on the move. So what really happened to Laura that night? And why did this loving mom, who only wanted to see her kids, end up at the center of such a dark and shocking mystery? This is the heartbreaking story of Laura Ackerson. Laura Ackerson entered the world on April 30th, 1984, born to Roger and Brenda Ackerson. From the start, Laura radiated joy, a bright, bubbly child with a warm and lively spirit. She spent her early years attending Grace Fellowship Church with her family, where she quickly became known for her sweet nature and gentle heart. While details about her early childhood remain scarce, everything changed for Laura in 1996. That year marked the collapse of what once seemed like a picture-perfect family. Her parents' constant fighting eventually led to divorce when Laura was just 12. The split hit her hard and left emotional scars that would linger. After the separation, Brenda took Laura and moved to Iowa. Laura later pursued graphic design at Kirkwood Community College, drawn by a natural flair for creativity. She had an instinct for art. Color, composition, and visual storytelling were second nature to her. Eventually, Laura relocated to Kingston, North Carolina, hoping for a fresh beginning. There, she attended a real estate school and found work in marketing and design. She also built a circle of close friends in nearby Raleigh. Having moved around so much growing up, Laura had never had a stable friend group. Finally, she felt like she belonged. In March 2007, while dining at a local restaurant, Laura met a man named Grant Hayes. Interestingly, they shared a birthday, April 30th, which sparked an immediate connection. Born in 1979 in Raleigh, Grant had a musical streak and a strong religious upbringing. He gained local recognition as a performer, playing small venues and bars, and had a magnetic personality that drew people in. Years before meeting Laura, Grant had married a woman named Emily Lovers, whom he'd fallen for soon after high school graduation. That relationship burned fast and bright, and then fizzled out. Their divorce left a deep mark on Grant, who had written love songs inspired by her. With the end of that marriage came a decline in his mental health. He was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, and prescribed powerful medications like lithium. But instead of sticking with treatment, Grant began self-medicating with alcohol and harder substances. As time passed, Grant's behavior grew more erratic. He dabbled in synthetic hallucinogens, which only amplified his worst traits: narcissism, paranoia, and aggression. He started having bizarre delusions, believing aliens controlled the government, and that he was a chosen one destined to survive the apocalypse by finding a spaceship. He even rejected modern medicine, including vaccines, convinced they were harmful. Despite his deteriorating mental state, Grant's music career was still afloat. He was booking regular gigs, and that's around the time Laura came into his life. To outsiders, Grant might have looked like a rising star, but behind closed doors, his relationship with Laura quickly became toxic. He was controlling, physically and emotionally abusive, and chronically unfaithful. Laura, already emotionally fragile from her childhood, struggled to break free. He isolated her from her friends and dictated nearly every part of her life, from her social circle to her daily routine. Shockingly, the couple tied the knot just months after meeting. Laura, longing for stability and love after years of emotional turmoil, believed she had found her fairy tale ending, but her friends were blindsided by the news. None of them even knew she was in a relationship, let alone married. Still, they stood by her, hoping she had made the right choice. Not long after Laura became pregnant, she was overjoyed, imagining a fresh chapter as a mother. Grant, on the other hand, wasn't thrilled. The news only intensified his possessiveness. When their son, Grant Jr., was born 9 months later, Laura poured every bit of love she had into him. Naming the baby after himself seemed like a classic move from Grant, not necessarily a sentimental one, but more a display of ego. Laura adored her son. Meanwhile, Grant was still chasing gigs, cheating, and indulging in drugs, showing little interest in fatherhood. Eventually, he was offered a job in the Virgin Islands. He took it without hesitation, leaving Laura and their newborn behind in North Carolina. Whether or not he was actually working out there is unclear, but one thing's for sure, he wasn't alone. Grant began seeing a woman named Amanda Perry Tucker, a single mother and aspiring actress. Amanda had scored small, uncredited roles in shows like The Sopranos and The Stepford Wives, but her career hadn't taken off. And that's where another chapter in this tangled story begins. Grant Hayes was instantly drawn to Amanda Perry Tucker, and not just because of her charm. Amanda had money, nearly $200,000 in cash and $80,000 worth of jewelry, possibly from her previous divorce, though that's never been confirmed. At the time Grant met her, he was flat broke, no savings, no stability. But Amanda had resources, and that changed everything for him. Their relationship picked up quickly. For Grant, being with Amanda was more than romance, it was leverage. He flaunted the affair, making no effort to hide it from Laura. In fact, he used it as a weapon, taunting and ridiculing her at every opportunity. But then Laura did something Grant never saw coming. She'd had enough. After years of enduring his manipulation, betrayal, and cruelty, Laura finally stood up and said she was leaving him for good. Surprisingly, even people close to Grant supported her decision. His own family, along with his ex-wife Emily, encouraged Laura to walk away, fully aware of how toxic Grant really was. But then came a twist. Laura discovered she was pregnant again. Despite everything Grant had put her through, she gave him yet another chance, though by now it was more like chance number 10. That decision spoke volumes about how deeply Laura loved her children. She was willing to endure emotional hardship just to try and keep her family intact, likely driven by the pain of her own parents' divorce. Trying to make things work, Laura packed up her life and moved to the Virgin Islands with her son Grant Jr., hoping proximity might help fix things. But Grant didn't see her arrival as a loving gesture. To him, it was an inconvenience. With Laura around, he couldn't keep living a double life under her nose. Eventually, Laura gave birth to her second son. Sadly, the baby faced serious health issues right from the start, and the family needed better access to medical care. So they relocated back to North Carolina. Grant was furious about the move. He blamed Laura and the kids for dragging him away from potential opportunities in the Virgin Islands. Meanwhile, Amanda remained in the picture, now living in New York, and urged Grant to explore opportunities in the entertainment industry there. But Grant didn't go to New York for work. He went to be with Amanda, and he loved it. He was finally close to her, away from his responsibilities, and immersed in a city full of distractions. Eventually, he reached out to Laura with a surprising request. He asked if he could take Grant Jr. for a diaper modeling photo shoot, promising he'd bring him right back. Laura hesitated but agreed. She wanted her kids to know their father, despite everything. What she didn't know was that Grant had a completely different plan. When he didn't return their son as promised, Laura turned to Facebook for clues, and what she found shattered her. Grant had secretly married Amanda in New York and was now living with her. Along with Grant Jr., Laura was devastated. But the nightmare wasn't over. When she called to confront him, Grant dropped another bombshell, one that would flip her world upside down. According to him, their marriage had never been legal in the first place. Desperate for answers, Laura checked the marriage certificate, and there it was. Grant's signature was missing. Their union had never been legally binding. Then came the most gut-wrenching part. Grant and Amanda had filed for emergency custody of Grant Jr. and won. Because there was no formal custody agreement, and because Laura had no job or stable housing at the time, the court sided with Grant. He showed up to the hearings alone and claimed Laura was unfit. The court ruled in his favor, without ever hearing her side of the story. She went back to court and presented strong evidence showing Grant's abusive behavior and unstable mental health. Her determination forced the court to order psychological evaluations for both parents. In the meantime, Laura was allowed to speak with her sons daily and see them on weekends. But even then, Grant and Amanda, now pregnant with his child, found ways to make those moments unbearable. They interrupted phone calls, limited her access to the boys, and did everything possible to keep Laura at a distance. Still, Laura held on. And then came the psych evaluation. Grant failed it badly. The report noted that he had no real connection with his kids. The children were more comfortable, more at ease, and visibly happier with Laura. She, on the other hand, was described as a devoted and nurturing mother. Someone who put her children first, no matter the cost. The court took this seriously and ordered a more in-depth evaluation of Grant. Around the same time, Amanda gave birth to a baby girl, Lillian, on June 9, 2011. Following an intense custody battle, the court ruled in favor of a rotating 3-2 schedule between Laura and Grant, alternating 3 days with one parent, then 2 with the other. But by this point, Grant was barely holding himself together, his temper was worsening, and it was clear something was boiling beneath the surface. Then came the moment everything fell apart. On July 13, 2011, Laura had plans to meet her close friend and business partner, Chavin, later that evening. But she never showed up, and she never called. At first, Chavin didn't panic. Laura had mentioned earlier she needed to stop by Grant's place to pick up her boys. Her last known communication was a text she sent to Grant, letting him know she was on her way. He never replied. Days passed with no word, no calls, no texts, nothing. By July 18th, after 5 days of total silence, 27-year-old Laura Ackerson was officially reported missing by loved ones. Police acted fast. They searched her apartment, which looked completely normal. No sign of a struggle, nothing out of place. Surveillance footage showed her leaving the building, but never coming back. Their next stop was Grant and Amanda's apartment. Officers arrived with a search warrant and immediately sensed something was off. The couple wasn't home, but what was inside the apartment raised every red flag imaginable. The scent of bleach hit them like a wall. The space had been scrubbed top to bottom, suspiciously spotless. A few things were conspicuously missing. A shower curtain, a vacuum cleaner, several rugs. Patches on the floor were discolored, clearly scrubbed with harsh chemicals. But what really rattled investigators were two pieces of paper they discovered. The first was a handwritten song draft titled "Man Killer." The lyrics painted a chilling picture of a woman being murdered, strangled to death. The second paper was a supposed agreement written and signed by Laura, stating she'd give up custody of her children to Grant for $25,000. Anyone who knew Laura would have immediately called foul. Her children were her everything. There was no price tag she'd ever put on being with them. This agreement screamed forgery. At that point, police knew time was critical. They needed to find Grant and Amanda fast. Security camera footage gave them a clearer timeline. After July 13th, Amanda was spotted with the kids at a local Chick-fil-A. Grant, meanwhile, was seen shopping in the early hours of July 14th at both Walmart and Target in Raleigh. But what he purchased was downright disturbing. Goggles, bleach, trash bags, tape, a reciprocating saw and blades, and a lint roller. That wasn't all. Later that day, Amanda called her daughter with a strange request to take care of the kids for most of the day. Then, on July 16th, Grant was caught making another unnerving purchase, large quantities of ice and coolers. Shortly afterward, he rented a U-Haul trailer. He, Amanda, and the two boys headed to Richmond, Texas, supposedly to visit Amanda's sister, Karen Berry. They arrived around July 19th, but Grant made yet another suspicious stop, this time at a local Home Depot. His shopping list? Heavy-duty gloves and 8 bottles of acid. Texas police, now collaborating with North Carolina authorities, paid a visit to Karen Berry. What she told them was alarming. On the night of July 19th, Grant and Amanda had asked to borrow a boat. They wanted to go out to Oyster Creek, a remote gator-filled canal with thick vegetation and murky water. Grant and Amanda asked whether the alligators in Oyster Creek ate humans, whether wild hogs could consume flesh, and whether bloodthirsty sharks were native to Texas waters. Karen assumed these were just strange city questions. But to investigators, it was clear they were scouting a body dump site. A team of officers was sent to Oyster Creek immediately. Another team combed the area for surveillance footage. Tragically, both efforts bore fruit. In Oyster Creek, after hours of carefully navigating dangerous waters filled with reeds and lily pads, police discovered remains. They had found Laura. What was left of her had been so badly mutilated that even determining the exact cause of death was difficult. But forensic examiners concluded she had likely died from manual strangulation or a powerful blow to the neck. The evidence was overwhelming. The bleach-soaked apartment, the forged custody letter, the disturbing purchases, the chilling lyrics, and the remains in Oyster Creek. Laura's life had ended not in an accident, not in a moment of rage, but as the result of a calculated, cold-blooded plan. Grant Hayes and Amanda Perry Tucker were no longer just suspects, they were murderers. When investigators located Laura's car, a white 2006 Ford Focus, it was clear someone had gone to great lengths to clean it. The interior had been washed thoroughly, and there was visible damage to the rear of the vehicle. Then came even more damning footage. Surveillance showed Amanda near Karen Berry's home, discarding bottles of acid. Just 13 days after Laura was last seen, the case took a major turn. On July 25, 2011, Grant Hayes and Amanda Perry Tucker were arrested at Grant's parents' house in North Carolina. Both were charged in connection with Laura's death. Their trials were held separately, and as expected, each tried to shift the blame. Grant claimed that Laura had shown up at the apartment on July 13th and threatened Amanda, saying she'd take her daughter the same way her own sons had been taken. According to Grant, Amanda lashed out during the confrontation and killed Laura, while he only helped cover it up. Amanda, on the other hand, painted herself as a victim. She said Grant had been emotionally abusive and manipulative for years. Her version of events claimed that Laura and Grant got into a heated argument, and Laura accidentally hit her head during the fight, something Amanda conveniently didn't witness because she was in another room with the children. Amanda said that when Grant told her Laura was hurt, he instructed her to leave with the kids so he could call for help. She went to Chick-fil-A, and when she returned, Laura was gone. Grant then casually claimed that Laura was fine and had already left. It wasn't until they were in Texas, she said, that Grant confessed what had really happened, and then threatened her into helping him hide the truth. Despite their stories, the mountain of evidence said otherwise. Both Grant and Amanda pleaded not guilty, but the court didn't buy it. On September 16, 2013, Grant Hayes was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. His demeanor in court was chilling. He smiled, laughed, and showed no hint of remorse. It was as if he thought he was going on vacation, rather than facing justice for a brutal crime. Amanda's sentencing came months later, on February 19, 2014. She received a sentence of 13 to 16 years. During sentencing, the judge shared his perspective plainly. He believed Amanda could have stopped what happened to Laura. Instead, she chose to be a participant. She may have expressed remorse in court, but many questioned whether it was genuine or just another performance. But that wasn't the end for Amanda. Texas authorities charged her separately for tampering with evidence, and she was hit with an additional 20-year sentence. As for how this horrifying crime actually unfolded, investigators believe Grant lured Laura to his apartment under false pretenses. She was told she'd be able to see her boys, maybe even take them home. Grant may have even lied and said he was ready to give her full custody. That's the only explanation for why Laura would travel all the way from Kingston to Raleigh alone, especially when her friends had warned her never to meet Grant without backup. Tragically, Laura walked straight into a trap. One theory suggests that once she arrived, Grant and Amanda forced her to write and sign the so-called custody letter, threatening her with the loss of her children if she didn't comply. Then she was attacked, either strangled or struck with a fatal blow. It was cold, calculated, and devastatingly cruel. Why? Likely because Grant wanted Laura gone for good, out of the picture, so he could continue his life with Amanda, free of custody battles and court hearings. But the ultimate irony? Amanda and Grant divorced just a year later, in October 2014. Everything he did, all the lies, the violence, the destruction, ended in nothing. Today, Laura's two sons, along with Amanda's daughter Lillian, are in the care of Grant's parents. Thankfully, they are loving and nurturing, the exact opposite of their father. But it's heartbreaking to think of the childhood these boys lost, growing up without their mother because of their father's selfishness. Laura Ackerson was a vibrant, loving, creative woman, a devoted mother, a loyal friend, and a daughter who deserved so much more. Her death was the result of manipulation, control, and cruelty at its worst. And it's a powerful reminder of the importance of knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and walking away from those who mean you harm, no matter how much love you think you have to give. Laura didn't get the chance to start fresh, but maybe her story will help someone else realize. It's never too late to choose yourself. Case 4. It started off like a normal night. Patrick Sean Betts, an 11-year-old boy from Upland, California, was out with his mom and sister at their favorite pizza place. He was happy, laughing, and doing what most kids loved to do in the 80s, playing arcade games and eating pizza. At one point, Patrick asked his mom for some change, and went off to play in the back arcade. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but then something happened. Patrick walked out of that pizza place and never came home. What really happened that night? Why did it take so long for anyone to start looking for him? And how could a case with so many strange twists go unnoticed for so long? Patrick Sean Betts was born on June 21, 1976, to Dennis and Barbara Betts, longtime residents of Upland, California. He grew up surrounded by sunshine, skateboards, and the kind of freedom that only kids in the 80s truly understood. Patrick went to Vista Elementary, and from an early age, it was clear that he had a big personality packed into a small frame. His mom, Barbara, described him as cheerful and easygoing, while his friends saw someone a little more layered, playful and street smart, a kid who didn't fall for nonsense but still had a sparkle in his eye. He was polite, helpful, and had a natural curiosity, often spending time at the local radio shack where he liked to hang out. His humor was sharp for his age, the kind that made people laugh and want to be around him. One of the closest people in Patrick's life was Kevin, his best friend who lived just across the street. Kevin had some health issues that kept him homebound, and not many kids made the effort to connect with him, but Patrick did, wholeheartedly. The two became inseparable, their friendship rooted in trust and genuine kindness. Like many kids of the time, Patrick loved video games, baseball, and skateboarding. His bond with Kevin deepened his love for baseball, especially since Kevin's dad coached the local Little League team. At night, Patrick couldn't sleep without his favorite blanket, a soft, comforting item that, for him, meant security and home. Then came January 20th, 1988, a day no one in the Betts family would ever forget. It started off as nothing out of the ordinary. Patrick, his mom Barbara, and his older sister Pamela were enjoying an evening at Pizza Chalet, a popular family spot in Upland with a built-in arcade. Patrick, as usual, made a beeline for the games after asking his mom for some quarters. He had recently become friends with the son of the restaurant's owner, and the two would spend hours playing together there. Although Barbara didn't know this new friend very well, she felt comfortable enough to let Patrick go play. Later that evening, Patrick came back to his mom to ask if he could go to a basketball game at Upland High with his friend. Thinking the game was nearby and trusting her son's judgment, Barbara gave him the okay. As Patrick walked out the door, he turned and asked her to save him a slice of pizza. It was a casual moment, something any parent would hear and smile at, but tragically, it would be the last time Barbara ever saw her son. The game they had wanted to watch was actually in Chino, nearly 8 miles away, a fact that the boys hadn't realized. Disappointed, they returned to Pizza Chalet and passed the time by going back to the arcade. Patrick was last seen around 9 p.m. playing video games there. After that, he said he was heading home, but he never made it. That night, his family waited anxiously, watching the door, hoping he'd walk in, maybe a little embarrassed for being late. But hours passed. Then the entire night, when the sun rose, it brought only dread. Patrick was missing. One would assume the local police would launch a thorough investigation immediately, but that wasn't what happened. Instead, Upland authorities quickly brushed it off, suggesting that Patrick had simply run away. They told his devastated family he'd be back once he got hungry. This theory seemed absurd to Barbara and Dennis. Yes, Patrick had been involved in a minor school altercation shortly before his disappearance, and there was a scheduled juvenile court date coming up, but he wasn't anxious about it. He hadn't expressed any desire to run, and nothing in his behavior indicated he planned to. In fact, his favorite blanket, his nighttime must-have, was still in his room. His clothes, his belongings, everything was untouched. If Patrick had truly run away, wouldn't he have taken something with him? But investigators stuck to their runaway theory. No Amber Alerts, no immediate search, no sense of urgency. To make matters worse, Upland wasn't exactly the safest town. With a population of just over 78,000, the city had a crime rate a few percentage points higher than the national average. Statistically, 5 serious crimes happen there every day, enough to raise red flags, especially when a child vanished. Determined not to let their son become just another missing poster on a wall, the family launched their own search, going door to door through Upland with flyers and questions, for anyone who might have seen something, anything. Their first stop, of course, was Pizza Chalet, the last place Patrick had been seen. They asked around, desperate for a lead, and finally caught a possible break. A woman who worked at a nearby beauty supply store mentioned seeing Patrick walk in with an older teenage boy. At first, it seemed like a glimmer of hope, but the woman's memory was hazy. The details kept slipping. First she was sure, then unsure, and at one point she couldn't even recall if Patrick had been alone or not. The Betts family suspected the boy might have been the son of the pizzeria owner, but since the witness couldn't describe the teen clearly, there was no way to confirm it. Just like that, the lead fizzled out and they were back to square one. The emotional toll was unbearable. The family was growing more frantic by the day, and their pleas to the police became more desperate. They insisted again and again that Patrick had not run away. Finally, after nearly 4 months of pushing, the authorities agreed to fully investigate. But by then, for precious months had already passed. When it comes to missing persons, the first 48 to 72 hours are vital. It's during this short window that evidence is still fresh, and the chances of finding someone alive are significantly higher. Once that window closes, the likelihood of answers or recovery drops dramatically, and the Betts family knew it. Though they were relieved to see law enforcement finally involved, they couldn't shake the gut-wrenching feeling that the delay had cost them everything. Adding to their heartbreak was the complete lack of media coverage. Because police had initially labeled Patrick as a runaway, his disappearance was met with silence. Only a few articles ever made it to print, and there was virtually no attention from TV or local news outlets. It was as if Patrick had been forgotten before the search had even begun. But the family remembered everything, and they never stopped watching for anything strange. The day after Patrick vanished, something chilling happened. Sierra Vista Elementary received a phone call. The woman on the other end claimed to be Patrick's grandmother and told the school that he wouldn't be returning because he was moving to Washington to live with her. The call was deeply unsettling. For one, the voice didn't belong to Patrick's actual grandmother, but more disturbingly, the caller knew specific details. The name of Patrick's school and the fact that his real grandmother had once lived in Washington. In reality, Patrick's grandmother had moved from Washington to California months before his disappearance. She had been battling cancer, and Patrick adored her. He was always by her side, helping however he could, Tragically, she passed away still not knowing what had happened to her grandson. The eerie phone call left the family shaken. Was it someone trying to cover their tracks? Or a cruel prank? Either way, it added to the growing list of mysteries surrounding Patrick's disappearance. And because it was 1988, there was no way to trace the call. No caller ID, no digital footprint, just one more dead end. But the oddities didn't stop there. For months after Patrick disappeared, something else strange happened, this time involving the very place he had last been seen. Pizza Chalet, once a lively hangout for local families, abruptly shut down. The owners packed up and left Upland without warning. Word soon got out that they had relocated to Los Angeles, and when police followed up, they found the family, but only briefly. Before long, they left again, this time reportedly heading overseas to the Middle East, their country of origin. To the Betts family, this wasn't just odd, it was alarming. Why would a thriving business vanish so suddenly? Why leave so quickly, right after a child had gone missing on their premises? Investigators managed to track down the owners in Los Angeles, but not for long. Once they left the country, the trail went cold again. And worse, no one ever learned the name of the owner's son. The same boy Patrick had been seen playing with that night. That meant police couldn't interview him, and the possible connection the beauty store clerk mentioned could never be confirmed. Once again, the Betts family found themselves at a dead end. Their frustration was mounting. It was like they were trapped in a nightmare with no exit. Every potential lead ended in confusion or silence. And just when they thought things couldn't get more maddening, the police made a decision that left the family completely stunned. At one point, for reasons that still remain unclear, investigators in Upland turned their attention to an unexpected suspect, Patrick's older brother. He was just 15 years old when Patrick went missing, and yet somehow, police became convinced he was involved. How they arrived at that conclusion is anyone's guess. The problem? There wasn't a shred of evidence backing their claims. Patrick's brother had an ironclad alibi. On the night Patrick vanished, he was hundreds of miles away in San Francisco, performing with his band. His fellow bandmates confirmed he'd been on stage that entire night, 7 hours from Upland. There was no possible way he could have been involved, but that didn't stop the police. Without notifying his family, they took the teenager in for questioning and kept him for over 5 hours. When the Betts family finally found out and rushed to the station, they were horrified to learn he was in the middle of a polygraph test, a test he reportedly failed. From there, things escalated. Officers even ordered him to write a confession, despite having no grounds for such a demand. The Betts family was furious. Their grief had already consumed them, and now they were forced to watch another son get emotionally torn apart over baseless accusations. Tragically, the ordeal left permanent scars. Already struggling with anxiety, Patrick's brother later developed PTSD, a diagnosis that only deepened the community's suspicions instead of evoking sympathy. People assumed his trauma was a sign of guilt, when in reality, it was the aftermath of being wrongfully targeted at such a young age. Sadly, this wasn't the last time Upland investigators turned the Betts family's life upside down. In 1991, more than 3 years after Patrick vanished, the family was jolted awake before dawn by loud knocks and flashing lights. At 6 in the morning, Upland police returned, this time armed with a search warrant. The family, still disoriented and confused, looked out their windows to find their home surrounded by officers, bloodhounds, and even people in hazmat suits. They hadn't been given any warning or explanation. The search went on for more than 12 hours, stretching into the evening. Every room was examined, the backyard was combed through, and all without telling the family what they were even looking for. Months later, they finally found out why. An anonymous tip had been phoned in, claiming Patrick's body was buried somewhere beneath the house. Without verifying the legitimacy of the call, investigators charged ahead and treated the family like suspects. The experience left them shattered. According to Patrick's sister, who had just given birth to twins at the time, the officers were cold and dismissive, completely devoid of compassion. The search yielded nothing. Just like the tip, it led nowhere. And still no answers. Despite everything the family endured, Patrick's case remained in the shadows. It barely received any attention from the media. There were no televised appeals, no headlines, and only a handful of articles in local outlets. One of the only times Patrick's face reached a larger audience was in 1993, when his photo was featured in Soul Asylum's music video, Runaway Train. The video was part of a powerful campaign to raise awareness about missing children. Alongside 35 other faces, Patrick's image appeared, flickering on screen in the hope that someone somewhere might recognize him. And while the campaign was a rare success, 26 of the 36 children featured were found. It wasn't enough to bring Patrick home. Years passed. The case went cold. Then something strange happened. What happened next only deepened the mystery surrounding Patrick's disappearance. One day, while Patrick's nephew, now grown and working as a security officer, was on duty, an older man approached him and started making small talk. Nothing seemed unusual at first, until the stranger casually referred to Patrick by the name Sean. That was the name Patrick's friends and family always used, his middle name, the one rarely mentioned in public. The nephew had never shared that detail. What followed was even more disturbing. The man began talking about Patrick's case with surprising familiarity, as if he had followed it for years. He rattled off facts and details that left the nephew chilled. After all, Patrick's disappearance had never received much attention. Beyond a single appearance in a music video from the early 90s, his story remained largely unknown. So, how could a random man not only know his name, but also the intricate pieces of a case that barely anyone ever discussed? Some believed that perhaps the man had simply heard about Patrick growing up in Upland. Maybe it was just small-town knowledge passed along over the years. But Patrick's loved ones weren't convinced. They had always felt like his case had been ignored, brushed aside, not something strangers would remember, let alone bring up decades later. Unfortunately, no one was able to identify the man or find out where he came from. He vanished as quickly as he appeared, leaving behind nothing but unease and unanswered questions. In February 2022, after so many years of silence, Patrick's case found new life, thanks to the internet. A true crime YouTube channel called Crimehound featured Patrick's story after a subscriber from Upland requested it. That same month, a Upland City Council meeting became an emotional moment of public plea, as Patrick's 73-year-old mother, Barbara, and his sister, Pamela, stood before the mayor and council members asking for help. Stephen was also present and shared Patrick's story with the officials, hoping it would finally lead to answers. During that meeting, Barbara revealed something heartbreaking. Her husband, Dennis, Patrick's father, had passed away back in 2009 without ever knowing what happened to his son. Her voice trembled with grief as she explained that while she no longer believed Patrick was alive, she still clung to one final wish, to bring him home, even if it was only to lay him to rest. After more than 3 decades, her pain had not faded. It had simply settled deeper. Pamela, too, made a powerful demand. She urged law enforcement to use modern investigative tools, DNA profiling, forensic databases, anything available now that hadn't existed back then. Technology had evolved, she argued, and so had the chances of solving cold cases. But investigators hit the same wall they always had. Without a suspect or even a person of interest, they had no one from whom to collect DNA. Still, something had shifted. After years of stagnation, new eyes were finally looking at the case. Detectives began re-examining witness statements and reviewing possible leads. While no major breakthroughs had come yet, the renewed attention offered something the Betts family hadn't felt in years: hope. Sadly, Barbara's health was beginning to decline. Pamela expressed that they were now racing against time, not just to solve the mystery, but to give her mother the closure she had waited far too long for. Patrick would be 48 years old today. The idea that he might still be alive seems more and more unlikely. And yet, the thought that he may have been kidnapped and raised by someone else still lingers in the background. If he were out there, wouldn't he have come forward by now? Still, hope doesn't fade easily. Even if Patrick is no longer alive, the Betts family simply wants the truth. They want to know what happened. They want justice. They want peace. America, don't miss out. Case 5. Between 1977 and 1993, the strangled bodies of these 6 women were discovered in secluded areas around Kansas City, Missouri. But before you start thinking this is about Henry Wallace, the Charlotte Strangler, or Anthony Sowell, the Cleveland Strangler, which we've already covered, this is a completely different case. It remained a mystery for decades, until DNA advancements finally exposed the truth. And unlike the others, this killer managed to escape justice for decades, only to keep insisting he's innocent even after being directly linked to his victims. In fact, here's what he had to say. Because you believe you're an innocent man. No, I don't believe it. I know I am. Okay. And here's what his peers have to say about him. He was always eager to help or happy to help, and he never complained. He just did his job and did it with a smile. We've heard it time and time again. People who seem harmless, the kind you'd never suspect, turning out to be cold-blooded serial killers. And after covering so many cases, one thing stands out. Most of these killers targeted vulnerable women. Why? Because even back then, they knew the harsh truth that if a woman went missing, the cops wouldn't care. In this case, it's a chilling example of exactly that. It all started with Stacy L. Swafford, a 17-year-old girl who had run away from home and was trying to survive on the streets of Kansas City. Her body was found on April 17, 1977, face down in a vacant lot. An autopsy confirmed she had been strangled. Her mother, Georgine Swafford, never recovered from the loss and eventually passed away from alcohol poisoning, holding on to the belief that she would see her daughter again in heaven. Then came Gwendolyn Kazine, the youngest of the victims. Just 15 years old, she was found on January 23, 1980. Her body left behind a building with wire wrapped around her neck and wrists. She had been working as a prostitute, and her father had reported her missing only a day before, though he hadn't seen her for over a week. Her death, like the others, was ruled as strangulation. Margaret J. Miller, another 17-year-old girl, was found on May 9, 1982, in an open field by a teenage boy walking to his grandmother's house. She had been working on Troost Avenue, and when police found her, some of her belongings were missing. The cause of death? Strangulation. Catherine M. Berry was different. She wasn't a prostitute, but a woman struggling with mental illness after the birth of her third child. She lived on the streets, accepting rides from strangers. On March 14, 1986, her body was discovered in an abandoned building, covered with leaves, a nylon stocking around her neck. She too had been strangled. Naomi Kelly was a 23-year-old single mother trying to turn her life around. She had been studying business and raising 2 children, but on August 16, 1986, she was found in a rundown park, a towel tied around her neck and face. Her autopsy confirmed strangulation. Debbie Blevins, 32, was found naked except for pink socks on November 27, 1986. Her body had been dumped in front of a church after she had fallen into drug addiction. She left behind a 9-year-old daughter. The cause of death? Strangulation. And Barnes was 36 when her body was discovered near downtown Kansas City on April 17, 1987, exactly 10 years after Stacy L. Swafford was found. She had worked as a housekeeper and exotic dancer, but also engaged in prostitution. Like the others, she had been strangled. Kelly A. Ford was only 20 when she was found in Roanoke Park on June 9, 1987. She had moved to Kansas City after high school, hoping for a better life, but she too was strangled and left behind. Angela M. Mayhew, 19, was discovered face down on the side of the road on September 12, 1987. She had been strangled, and police later found hairs on her sweater that connected her death to the others. Shalia Ingold, 36, was found inside a van outside an auto repair shop on November 3, 1987. Her rings were missing, and her cause of death was, once again, strangulation. Carmeline R. Hibbs, 30, was found in a parking lot on December 19, 1987. She had been strangled and left behind like so many others. Connie Luther, 29, was found lying on a snowdrift on January 11, 1993. A shoelace was wrapped around her neck. She had been one of 5 children raised by a single mother who had passed away the year before. One by one women were turning up, assaulted, strangled, and left for dead. The patterns were screaming at the cops, yet somehow nobody put the pieces together. And if you think that's the worst of it, oh, you have no idea. There were more victims, so many more. But here's the part that'll make your blood boil. The man responsible was arrested multiple times for assault, and every single time he walked free. If the system had done its job, these women might still be alive. But it didn't. And the man behind this nightmare? Lorenzo Gilliard, the trash collector strangler. But here's what makes it even scarier. Lorenzo Gilliard wasn't some creepy guy lurking in the shadows. No, he was the last person you'd suspect. A hard-working trash truck driver who climbed his way up to management. A guy with a friendly smile, a solid job, and coworkers who swore he was one of the nicest people around. And that right there? That's the terrifying part. Because time and time again, history has proven that the most dangerous killers, they aren't the ones hiding in the dark. They're the ones hiding in plain sight. Born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri, Lorenzo was one of 5 children. Even as a child, his aggressive nature stood out. At school, he played sports with his brothers. but his larger-than-average size made him intimidating. And he didn't just use his strength on the field. He had a reputation for bullying smaller kids. His lack of discipline, poor grades, and constant skipping of school led him to drop out before he could even reach the 10th grade. By the mid-1960s, he met a young woman named Rena Hill, and the two quickly became a couple. Their relationship took a serious turn when Rena became pregnant, and on November 20th, 1968, they got married. But tying the knot didn't change Lorenzo's violent tendencies. Instead, he fell deeper into crime and began showing disturbing behaviors toward women. In January of 1969, he was arrested for assaulting and sexually touching a girl he knew. However, he was released after what authorities called a reconciliation agreement, in which the victim retracted her statement after Lorenzo apologized. But an apology wasn't going to stop him from harming more women. Adding to the horror, his family history was just as disturbing. In 1970, his own father, Lorenzo Gilliard Sr., was convicted of rape. Just 2 years later, Lorenzo Jr. found himself in trouble again, this time for sexually violating and assaulting another woman. She bravely identified him in a police lineup, saying he had choked her unconscious. But somehow, the authorities decided her testimony wasn't strong enough, and they dropped the charges. That single decision, letting him go, turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. In 1973, Lorenzo's violent nature wasn't just terrorizing strangers, it was destroying his own home. That year, he was arrested for physically and sexually assaulting his wife, who bravely told the police that he had been abusing her for their entire marriage. But, as expected, when a black woman is the victim, justice was nowhere to be found. Instead of real consequences, no prison time, no lasting punishment. Lorenzo walked away with nothing more than a fine and a divorce. Just like that, he was free to do it all over again. This man was beyond despicable. Not only was he abusive toward his wife, but he was aggressive toward other women in public, and the worst part, the police did absolutely nothing. Then, in February of 1974, he was arrested again, this time for attacking a 25-year-old exotic dancer. She identified him in a lineup. But just like before, the charges were magically dropped because of a so-called reconciliation agreement. And then just 5 months later, he did it again. This time, he went after a 13-year-old girl, a child. She was the daughter of a friend, and he assaulted her near the Missouri River. But when the girl changed her statement, the charges were dropped again. So let that sink in. A fully grown man harmed a 13-year-old, and he still walked free. However, this time, he got a tiny bit of punishment, if you can even call it that. He was convicted of an unlawful act with a minor and sentenced to 9 months in jail. 9 months. That's it. Less than a year. Not even long enough for the world to forget his name. And somehow, after all of this, he got married again. But of course, that didn't last long. His second wife left him, saying the same thing his first wife did. He was violent, abusive, and dangerous. Then, in the late 1970s, he got married a third time. Can you believe it? Even with all the evil he had done, he still managed to convince another woman he was worth marrying. By 1979, he was back at it again. This time, he attacked a young couple, assaulting the woman and threatening to kill her fiancé. Both victims identified him as their attacker. Yet somehow, at his trial in September of 1980, a jury acquitted him due to lack of evidence. A few months later, he was arrested for aggravated assault against his third wife. And guess what? Another joke of a punishment, a fine, and another divorce. That's it. He walked free yet again. Then came 1981, and things escalated to an entirely new level of horror. He attacked his ex-wife not once, but twice. The first time, he knocked out her front teeth. The second time, he stabbed her in the hand with an ice pick. Surely, this had to be the moment they finally locked him up, right? Wrong. He was charged with third-degree assault, but was let off with probation. Fast forward to 1991, and surprise, surprise, he was arrested yet again, this time for theft. But he paid $3,500 in bail and walked free. The following spring, he finally received 4 years in prison. Not for his past violent crimes, not for hurting women, not for assaulting a child, but for violating his probation. Imagine that. All the women he hurt, all the lives he destroyed, and what finally put him behind bars was violating probation. Not the blood on his hands, not the years of trauma he inflicted, just a probation violation. And here's another twist in this nightmare story. His sister Patricia Dixon was just as deadly. In 1983, She was convicted of murdering a client while working as a prostitute and was sentenced to 11 years in prison. Then came January 10, 1983. Lorenzo was released from prison, only to be thrown back in shortly after when he was arrested in Wyandotte County, Kansas, for making bomb threats. But just like every other time, his stay in jail didn't last long.